Let's see here. In my view, there seems to be a growing disparity in the conspiracy world concerning current events and the implication of these events. Some are reporting that plans of the powers that be are getting stronger and taking hold towards our doom with vaccines, geoengineering, economic catastrophe. Others, like Fulford and Wilcox, see the powers that be endgame thwarted and getting under control, or at least on a path. I don't know if there's a question there. Let me think. I guess he wants to know what you think. Is it all doom and gloom, or is it what Fulford and Wilcox are saying about it's the end game for the powers that be?
I don't. Well, okay, it's not doom and gloom. That's for sure. Let me say that emphatically, clearly, and straight away. And my reason for saying this, and I've said this over and over again, and I'll say it again until people get tired of me saying it. If it was all doom and gloom, I wouldn't be here. Neither would you, neither would most of the people listening here. We wouldn't have come to this planet. There are many other places you can turn up for an incarnation to have a lot of fun and challenge and learning and stuff. Why come to a place that's going to self-destruct where it all ends up in tragedy? I didn't come here to play a fixed game, and I don't believe it's a fixed game. And there are so many people who have come here, what Dolores Cannon calls volunteers. The first wave of those volunteers are probably in their 50s now. And then there are other waves that followed. There's a whole group who are in their 40s. There's a whole group who are in their 30s. And then there are all the kids coming through, all kind of building on top of each other. Sometimes I get emails from people saying, well, when's the cavalry going to arrive? And my reply is like, well, go look in the mirror. Because we are the cavalry. We shouldn't be waiting for someone to come and save us. We've got this in our hands in theory. And this relates back to what I was saying right at the start of the show, which is that it's not about talking to each other. It's actually about expansive, practical action out there. And maybe we can talk about this just a little bit more later as this show progresses. So that's my message of encouragement to people. This is not about doom and gloom. It's not about choosing which way we're all going to die. It just isn't like that at all. There's a real tipping point here. And those of you who know my work and have listened to my various presentations over the last 2 or 3 years know that I often relate this to a game. And in relating it to a game, I don't mean anything trivial about this. If you're playing in the Olympics or in the Soccer World Cup or in any other major, or in the Super Bowl, to you guys over there in America, it doesn't feel trivial at all when you're in the middle of all that. It feels like high drama, and it feels like you're playing, that you're the best and you're playing against the best, and everyone's watching and there's a lot at stake, and that's what it feels like. It doesn't feel trivial. And this is the kind of thing I mean when I talk about a game here. And I think the game is balanced. I think the game really is balanced. And one of the reasons why there is such a lot of activity in the skies, and has been ever since 1947 or 1941 or whatever it was, that the visitors really started to roll up in numbers, is because this really is where the action is at. This is a theater where a lot of stuff is being played out, and there's a lot at stake, I have reason to believe, and there's a lot hanging on how we handle things here down in planet Earth. And I don't think there's any overt interference in the game from the ETs, but I think there may be, here I'm talking about the benevolent ETs, but I think that there's a lot of subtle encouragement and intervention that doesn't violate any of the rules and protocols, which I think is really very important. We've got a lot of people out there, and I say people advisedly, because they are people. They're people like us. They may look a little bit different every now and then, but they're all people. We're all people. And they're rooting for us in many ways. But because this is all about free will, it's all a learning process, an experiment, whatever words you want to use, the outcome is not certain. And the importance of the outcome not being certain, just like it is at the start of the Super Bowl, at the start of the Soccer World Cup, that gives us encouragement because it means that we're in with a chance, otherwise we wouldn't be there in that playing field in the first place. And so that's all a kind of slightly complex response to people saying, is it all doom and gloom? The answer is absolutely categorically not. I think this is a very, very exciting time to be here. And what I've heard, and I'm willing to say this on record here, what I've heard from insider contacts who I've been in touch with is that a lot is going to be resolved one way or the other in the next 6 years. It's something like that. I don't know whether it's 5 or I don't know whether it's 7, but it's like the next handful of years will decide which way this whole seesaw is going to tip, one way or the other. There are all kinds of games being played out here. And as regards the encouraging news, it's very clear to me that some things are not going according to plan and some things are not going according to schedule. And many of you may remember way back, it feels like a long time ago now, but it's just over a couple of years ago in 2008. Kerry and I at that point, we were really becoming quite concerned because we had picked up something like 14 or 15 different independent strong data points that there was going to be something huge and bad that was likely to occur around the back end of 2008. Possibly a nuclear war, something to do... I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff about bad things that were going to happen around about then. That was the time when Dr. Bill Deagle had his very famous nightmarish vision that really terrified him. And he's not a man to be terrified easily, but he was really, really shaking and almost in tears when he phoned us to tell us about this nightmarish vision that he'd had of an American city that was engulfed in a nuclear explosion. I mean, he didn't invent that stuff, and he's not crazy. He really saw that. And to the people who say to me, well, you know, this proves that Dr. Bill is deluded, or this proves that Dr. Bill is crazy, or this proves that Dr. Bill is wrong all the time, or something like that. I say, no, you've got to see it in a different way. He saw something that clearly didn't transpire. We know that it didn't transpire in our timeline, but this may have already happened on a different timeline. And it's actually quite strange putting those words together in the same sentence, you know, and I'll say it again. That may have already happened on a different timeline. In other words, it didn't happen to us. It happened to another version of us that we're not experiencing consciously right now. And this all gets very weird when you start talking about things like this. But the upshot of my long answer to this part of the question is that I do think that there's been a timeline change. I do think that we're heading in the right direction, whereas back in 2008 it was by no means clear which direction we were heading in. But I think that we're not out of the woods yet. It's not all over. You know, it's not time just to go back home and just relax because things can flip backwards and forwards in all kinds of different ways. And like many people listening to this, maybe like you guys, I look at the mainstream media every day. The first thing I do when I wake up, besides checking the alternative news media, is I check the mainstream news media. I look on BBC and CNN to see what's happening in the world, to see what they are telling us is happening in the world. And then every day, besides a few little skirmishes here and there, like the thing in North Korea and, you know, various scares and various rumors, it's like, okay, you know, we're still standing. Nothing bad has happened yet. And there's all the kerfuffle that happened just almost exactly a month ago with Cliff High making dramatic prognostications seen in his webbot project, Half Past Human. Pretty much forecasting, you know, that the what's-his-name was just about to hit the fan any day now. He gave a date and a time. He was wrong. Now, like Bill Deagle, he may not have been crazy about that, but what it shows is that technology that he was using is now no longer adequate for forecasting the future because it can be wrong, and thank goodness it can be wrong. It means that the future that we're creating is actually transcending the ability for people to be able to forecast it. And just like Bill Deagle was wrong with his vision about the nuclear attack on an American city, thank goodness he was wrong. That was avoided as well. And so we don't know where we're going here. No one can forecast this stuff anymore. We can't forecast it. We can't forecast it in our dreams. We can't forecast it in our channeling. We can't forecast it with the half-past human technology that they've got using the analysis of asymmetric language. And I bet you that the insiders can't forecast it for them either. It's wide open. And that's my answer to that question.
That's good. So, Bill, I have a question of my own. What do you think of the field right now? How do you see it compared to, let's say, 20 years ago?
The field?
Yeah, the field of all these areas that we're playing with.
UFO investigation, paranormal investigation, disclosure.
I think that 20 years ago, let me think, when does 20 years ago take?
Let's say in the 90s compared to now.
Okay, sure. I remember, right. It's a good question, because shortly before that, in something like 1988, and maybe some of your listeners will remember or be able to research the dates a little bit more accurately than I can, but around about 1987, 1988, this is when William Cooper, and John Lear started to talk about an aspect of the ET and UFO phenomenon that was much darker than had ever been published before. And that's also when Val Valerian, that's the pen name of Captain John Grace, started to write the Matrix books. And I remember back in 1988, 1989, I got hold of the book called Matrix 2. So, and it was basically what he did was he just published his entire filing cabinet full of drawings and research articles and contactee reports and hypotheses and photographs. It was an incredible book. It was like a sort of paper database of stuff, but it contained material that previously hadn't really hit the alternative media, stuff to do with genetic experiments at the Dulce base, things to do with cattle mutilations, things that suggested that part of the agenda might be darker than had previously been thought by most people. And with some exceptions, before that time, and I'm speaking really, really generally here, because we're talking about kind of trends of alternative culture, if you like, in the way that all of that has evolved in the last generation or two. In the 1950s, the culture was like the George Van Tassel and the George Adamski culture, which is like, oh look, there are these humans coming to us from Venus. How interesting, And I'm being a little bit flip about this, but I'm just trying to paint something in a caricature. And then in the 60s and 70s, it was like, well, maybe they're not from Venus. Maybe they're intergalactic. And I wonder what kinds of power systems that they really used to get here. And that's when Leonard Stringfield started to research into crash retrievals. And the whole subject started to acquire a sophistication about how these visitors from other planets were getting here and what were they really doing here and what was the whole kind of taxonomy of all the different types that were coming here. And that's when the grey started to become anchored in people's minds as a recurring feature in all of these reports. And then after that, there's this other wave, which is when everything started to get darker, like, oh my goodness, this is, I think it was Bill Cooper who really started to publicize the idea that there was a deal made between the Americans and the ETs back in Edwards Air Force Base, then called Muroc in 1954, and so on and so forth. And all the things that we now, that have become part of the lore and legend, an established sort of ground floor set of agreed assumptions about the field. Just over 20 years ago, all of that stuff was kind of new. And since then, I guess there's been another sort of aspect to this as well, which